Delmas Colvin is an American serial killer who committed a series of at least 8 murders against girls and women engaged in prostitution in New Jersey and Ohio between 1987 and 2005. According to his testimony, in January 2000, he lured 38-year-old Valerie Jones into his truck, strangled her, and then dumped her body in Lake Erie. He lured 42-year-old Jacqueline Thomas into his truck's cabin, after which he violated and subsequently killed her. Her body was found the next day in Monroe County. In April 2005, he killed 43-year-old Lily Summers, whom he had previously offered money in exchange for sex. He killed 40-year-old Dorothea Wetzel, who was found on the banks of the Maumee River in southern Toledo. Colvin was charged with the cold case murder of 27-year-old Donna Lee White, who was killed on September 15, 1987 in Atlantic City. Bobby Sue Terrell was a 29-year-old diagnosed schizophrenic from Woodlawn, Illinois who worked on a midnight shift in nursing homes across Illinois and Florida. She also suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Beginning in 1984, she killed 12 elderly victims in St. Petersburg, Florida by insulin overdoses, and would cover her tracks by calling the police, mutilating herself, and saying there's a serial killer loose in the home. She fainted frequently on duty, with no apparent cause, and twice she slashed her own vagina with a pair of scissors. The second wound required emergency surgery. She stabbed herself in rage and frustration over her own infertility. Police finally arrested her when they discovered her psychiatric background. In February 1988, Bobby Sue pled guilty to reduced charges of second-degree murder and was sentenced to a combined term of 65 years in prison but died in 2007. Adam Lane, the highway killer. His first victim was Darlene Eval, who lived near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. She was stabbed and killed on July 13, 2007. At the time she was talking on the telephone in the backyard, Lane stabbed her to death while her family was inside the house. Lane's second victim was a woman named Patricia Brooks, whom he stabbed on July 17, 2007 in York County, Pennsylvania. She survived. His third victim was a woman in New Jersey by the name of Monica Massaro. He stabbed and killed her a day before he committed his final crime. He broke into a house on July 30, 2007, and attacked a 15-year-old girl with a knife. Her parents awoke to the sounds of her struggling. Her father was able to subdue Lane and wrestle the knife he was carrying away from him. Chelmsford police were contacted, arrived at the scene and arrested him. Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, first murder. During his youth, he began mutilating neighborhood cats and dogs in order to gain a temporary sense of power he felt deprived of at home. This is a young serial killer in the making, practicing what is known as victim selection. Later in life, the brutality develops and they begin to select human beings as their victim. In 1948, when Richard was 13 years old, he got his revenge on the leader of a small neighborhood gang that had been bullying him. After years of torment, Richard snapped and beat Charlie Lane to death with a wooden dowel. After Richard killed him, he cut Charlie's fingers off with a hatchet and pulled his teeth out with pliers to prevent the body from being identified. Richard then went after the rest of Charlie's gang and beat them all nearly to death with an iron rod. In a later interview, he said that this is when he learned that it was better to give than to receive. Oscar Ray Boland, American serial killer. On January 25, 1986, 25-year-old Natalie Blanche Holly left work around 1:30 a.m. Her body was found hours later by a morning jogger. She had been stabbed to death. On November 5, 1986, 17-year-old Stephanie Collins, a high school student, disappeared after finishing her shift at work. On December 5, 1986, her body was found wrapped in sheets and towels. She had been stabbed to death and her skull was also crushed. The same day, 26-year-old Terry Lynn Matthews went missing. Her car was found outside a post office with the engine still running. Her body was located later that day in some woods, wrapped in a white sheet. Her throat had been cut and she had been bludgeoned. Boland was executed by lethal injection at 10:16 p.m. on January 7, 2016. Tracy Marguerite Andrews is an English woman who murdered her fiancé, Lee Raymond Harvey. Andrews, a former model and barmaid, attacked Harvey in his car after they had stopped, following an argument on the way to their flat. Andrews brutally stabbed Harvey over 42 times. Jealous, possessive and volatile, Andrews had attacked Lee during a violent fit of rage, one of many he'd endured during their 2-year on-again off-again relationship. She claimed that Mr. Harvey was killed in a road rage attack, saying that a fat man with staring eyes had stabbed him over 30 times. Andrews was released in July 2011, having been refused official anonymity. She has started a new life under the name Tia Carter. She is banned from traveling within 25 miles of her victim's family without supervision. Larry Dean Bright, also known as the Bone Crusher, is an American serial killer responsible for the deaths of at least 8 women between the ages of 30 to 41 in central Illinois. Not long after 2000, Bright began to spend a great deal of free time around sex workers, taking particular interest in African American women. The murders occurred between July 2003 and October 2004, in Peoria and Tazewell County, Illinois. His nickname derives from his purported propensity for burning his victims' bodies, before crushing their bone fragments with a hammer. After confessing to his crimes in May 2005, he was convicted of 8 counts of murder. Bright will serve 100% of his sentences of natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. China P. Arnold, the microwave baby killer. Arnold, who had been convicted of abduction in 2000 and forgery in 2002, brutally killed her 28-day-old daughter, Paris. The infant was placed in a microwave oven, for what analysts suspect was longer than 2 minutes, and died shortly after removal. Death occurred because her internal temperature reached critical temperatures. In the words of medical examiner, Dr. Marcella Piero, she was cooked. Arnold's cellmate told the court that she had confessed to putting her daughter in the microwave and switching it on, because she was afraid that her boyfriend would leave her if he discovered that he was not the baby's father. Arnold has been incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women since September 11, 2008. The jury found China, the murderous mom Arnold, guilty of aggravated murder. On May 20, 2011, China Arnold was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Richard Kenneth Jerk is currently on death row in Florence, Arizona. On September 14, 1993, he killed a former friend's family. He believed Albert Luna Jr. had burgled his house. Jerk showed up at the Luna home and forced himself in at gunpoint. Patricia Luna and her 5-year-old son Damien were at home. He secured Mrs. Luna and her son by tying their arms and legs and gagging them. When Rochelle Luna arrived several hours later, he took her to her bedroom where he raped and killed her. When Albert Luna Sr. arrived at home, Jerk forced him into his bedroom at gunpoint, handcuffed him to a bed and smashed his head with a baseball bat, then removed the handcuffs believing him dead. Mr. Luna regained consciousness and charged Jerk. He killed Mr. Luna, then shot Mrs. Luna and Damien in the head. Before he left, he spread gasoline around the house and turned on the stove, but the house didn't burn. In 2015, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, a man choked his estranged wife and used a chainsaw to kill her before ending his own life with the machine. Nicole Peppelman, 43, was brutally murdered in the basement of the family's home along the 1100 block of Country Lane in Lower Moreland. The mother of 3 suffered gaping cutting wounds to her abdomen from a chainsaw. She also was stabbed in the neck and choked. An autopsy revealed her husband, 48-year-old Christopher Peppelman, then took the chainsaw to his right thigh and abdomen. His death was ruled a suicide. The couple's 14-year-old son discovered the bloody scene. The chainsaw was laying next to them. Their other 2 children were not home. The results of toxicology tests on Christopher Peppelman reveal that he had no drugs in his system and just a minuscule amount of alcohol that is not worth mentioning. Robert Sylvester Alston, American serial killer who raped and murdered at least 4 women in Greensboro, North Carolina. His first confirmed murder occurred in April 1991 when he strangled 23-year-old Joanne Robinson, a prostitute addicted to crack cocaine. Her naked body was found several blocks from his home. Alston committed his second murder in October of that year, strangling 26-year-old Sharon Martin. He dismembered her corpse and then scattered the remains in various areas of Greensboro. By late November, utility workers found her severed head and one of her hands in a wooded area near the Jackson Middle School. The third murder occurred during the spring of 1992 when the naked and decapitated body of 19-year-old Shanka Warren was discovered by police at a vacant lot near Alston's home. His last confirmed murder took place in December 1993 when he raped and strangled 41-year-old Lois Elizabeth Williams. He dumped her body in the Piedmont National Cemetery. Rory Enrique Conde, the Tamiami Trail Strangler, is a Colombian-born serial killer who killed 6 prostitutes in Florida. From September 1994 to January 1995, he was sentenced to death on March 7, 2000, and has been on the Florida death row since. On September 17, 1994, Conde killed cross-dressing male prostitute Lazaro Comsana. He later said that he killed Lazaro after finding out he was a man during sex. Conde then killed 2 more prostitutes, Elisa Martinez on October 8 and Charity Nava on November 20th. Conde then killed 3 more prostitutes, Wanda Crawford on November 25th, Nicole Schneider on December 17, and Rhonda Dunn on January 12, 1995. After each murder, he knelt over the body and verbally blamed the victim for his marital problems. He strangled his victims to death and then anally raped the corpses. Manuela Rodriguez, circular power saw baby murderer. In March of 2015, Rose Herrera, a baby just 7 months old, was killed because she wouldn't stop crying. Her grandmother brutally beat her with an 18-inch pipe wrench, and stuffed a sock deep down into her mouth. She then took a circular power saw to the baby's throat. Rodriguez called her sister to tell her she had killed the baby. The grandmother, 52-year-old Manuela Rodriguez, was taken into custody and was treated at Mount Sinai Hospital after attempting to take her own life with the circular saw, cutting herself across her own throat. Rose was already dead from the pipe wrench beating and asphyxiation when the grandmother cut her throat and chest with the saw. Manuela Rodriguez was charged with first-degree murder over the death. In 1987, a former Cal State Fresno professor murdered a male prostitute and dismembered him with a chainsaw. A Los Angeles Superior Court judge sentenced Max Bernard Frank, 58, to 25 years to life with the possibility of parole in 17 years. The victim, Tracy Newt, 18, was a Hollywood transient from Kansas City, Missouri. Newt's arms and parts of his legs were scattered around the McBean Parkway in Valencia. His head and torso were discovered 200 miles north in a field near Madeira. Authorities targeted Frank when he returned a rented chainsaw with bits of blood and flesh in the inner workings. He claimed that he had run over a dog in Beverly Hills and had used the chainsaw to dismember the dog. Frank taught political science at City University of New York and Boston University before arriving at Cal State Fresno in 1969. He died of a heart attack in prison in 1997. Gary Ray Bowles, the I-95 killer, was an American serial killer who was executed in 2019 for the murders of 6 men in 1994. Bowles killed his first known victim, John Hardy Roberts, age 59, who had offered him a place to live. Bowles beat and strangled him to death. Over the next 6 months, Bowles murdered 4 other men. He would prostitute himself to his victims before beating and strangling them and stealing their credit cards. On November 22, 1994, Bowles was arrested for the murder of Walter Jamily Hinton in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, and confessed to all 6 murders. Bowles told police that following his 1991 release from prison he had moved in with a girlfriend. She became pregnant but then had an abortion. After she learned that Bowles was a sex worker, he told police that he blamed gay men for the abortion, and this led him to becoming a murderer. Charles Albright, The Eyeball Killer was an American serial killer from Texas. In December 1990, Mary Lou Pratt, 33, a prostitute in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, was found dead wearing only a t-shirt and bra. She had been shot in the back of the head as well as being badly beaten. The killer had removed both of her eyes with surgical precision and had taken them. February 1991, Susan Beth Peterson, 27, a prostitute, was found on the same street as Mary Pratt. She was nearly nude and had been shot in the top of her head, in her left breast, and in the back of her head. Her eyes had been removed. March 1991, Shirley Williams, a prostitute, was found dead lying near an elementary school. Her nude body propped up against a curb. Her eyes had been removed. She had facial bruises and a broken nose and had been shot in the face and through the top of her head. He died in prison in 2020. Marcelo Costa de Andrade, the vampire of Niterói, is a Brazilian serial killer who murdered 14 boys in the vicinity of Itabaré, 30 kilometers from Niterói, Rio de Janeiro in 1991. Andrade frequented church and was told by a preacher that children go to heaven when they die. As a result, this sparked an interest in killing children. He was known to rape, strangle, beat, and drink the blood of his victims. He confessed to committing acts of necrophilia with at least one of his victims' body. He would keep personal items from the victim after the crime. He positioned or posed at least one body after death. Marcelo was caught after one of the victims escaped and alerted the authorities. He confessed to killing the 14 boys and was preventively detained at the Heitor Carvalho Psychiatric Hospital in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The Chicago Ripper crew, Robin Hischt, Edward Spritzer, and brothers Andrew and Thomas Kokoralais, in 1981 would drive around the city in their van. When they found a victim, they would take them to Hischt's house, which he called the Satanic Chapel. The victims would be beaten, tortured, raped, and mutilated in ritualistic ways. They attacked the women with knives, axes, razors, tin can lids, tin openers, glass bottles, wires, you name it, stabbing, strangling, shooting. Hischt would read passages of the Satanic Bible as his partners brutally killed the women. They would remove the victim's breast with a wire garrote while she was still alive, masturbate into the flesh, chop it into pieces, and devour it. They would dump the 18 bodies in alleys, under bridges, and in forests located in the outskirts of the city. Yoo Young-chul, a South Korean serial killer and self-confessed cannibal, known as the Raincoat Killer. His tools of choice for these murders included a customized hammer, jackknife, and gloves, to murder mostly older victims, until his focus shifted to the decapitation and mutilation of escorts after being dumped by a girlfriend who worked in that profession. He burned 3 and mutilated at least 11 of his victims. Yoo admitted he had eaten the livers of some of his victims. He was arrested in 2004 and confessed to murdering a total of 21 victims. Yoo Young-chul was sentenced to death in 2005 and is currently awaiting execution. He claimed to have killed 26 people. He has 21 confirmed kills, but was only convicted of 20 murders along with other aggravated crimes. Daniel Rakowitz is an American murderer and cannibal. He was born in 1960 in Rockport, Texas. He moved to New York around 1985. In Manhattan's East Village in 1989, Rakowitz walked around Tompkins Square Park, bragging that he had killed his roommate, Monica Beryl. He bleached and boiled the bones to disinfect them, and hid them. He said that he had boiled her head and made soup from her brain. He had tasted it and liked it, and thereafter he referred to himself as a cannibal. Rakowitz enjoyed his cannibalistic transgression so much that he scrawled on the door of his apartment, "Is it soup yet? Welcome to Charlie Gaines Ranch East, home of the fine young cannibals." He was found not guilty by reason of insanity on February 22, 1991, and was moved to a state hospital for the criminally insane. Big Lurch, hip-hop cannibal rapper, Antron Singleton, on April 10, 2002, he murdered his 21-year-old roommate, Tanisha Issays, in the apartment he shared with her and her boyfriend in Los Angeles, California. The victim was found in her apartment at night by a friend. Her chest had been torn open and a 3-inch blade was found broken off in her. Teeth marks were found on her face and on her lungs, which had been torn from her chest. The friend testified that Singleton was naked and covered in blood, standing on the street and staring at the sky. A medical examination performed shortly after his capture found human flesh in his stomach that was not his own. The victim's boyfriend said he and the aspiring rapper used PCP the day before the murder took place. During his career before prison, he recorded 2 albums, Da Family, 1998, and It's All Bad, 2004. Is currently incarcerated at California Healthcare Facility. The Hiharobomaniac, sadistic killer husband drove electric drill into his wife's brain and stabbed her with a screwdriver. Hiharobomaniac inflicted 270 injuries on Sarah Al-Shawarfi, 28, while their 4 children, aged between 2 and 8, were in the house in Sheffield. She was also allegedly attacked with metal bars and a knife in the 105-minute assault by her husband. She had been hit over the head repeatedly with a variety of weapons. Post-mortem results showed the mother died from blood loss, brain injuries, and inhaling blood. He left 1 screwdriver embedded in her eye socket. A judge jailed Maynard for life and ordered him to serve at least 23 years before he is considered for release. The judge said that psychiatrists agreed he was suffering from a serious psychotic illness, probably paranoid schizophrenia. Stephen Sean Griffiths, the Crossbow Cannibal, is a British cannibalistic stalker and serial killer. In 1991, he was diagnosed as a schizoid psychopath. On June 22, 2009, Griffiths took a prostitute named Susan Rushworth to his flat and killed her before dismembering her in his bathtub. His next 2 victims were killed in the next year. Suzanne Blamires, his 3rd and final victim, attempted to escape but was fatally shot with one of his crossbows and then stabbed. After killing his victims, Griffiths would dismember them in his bathtub and cook parts of their bodies for him to consume, sometimes eating them raw. Afterward, Griffiths would place parts he didn't consume in plastic bags and dump them into a nearby lake. He was suspected of many more murders of prostitutes around Britain and was eventually sentenced to a whole life order without parole. Beverly Allitt, dubbed the Angel of Death, was a nurse who was convicted of murdering 4 children, attempting to murder 3 other children, and causing grievous bodily harm to a further 6 children. She worked at Grantham Hospital, Lincolnshire. She was sentenced to 13 concurrent terms of life imprisonment on May 28, 1993. She is presently at the top security Rampton Secure Hospital in Nottinghamshire. The minimum term she was required to serve before becoming eligible for parole was 30 years, though she would only be released at that point if no longer considered a threat to the public. Allitt's motives have never been fully explained. According to one theory, she suffers from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a controversial personality disorder which supposedly prompts its sufferers to falsify illnesses in others, in order to attract attention. Douglas John Edwin Crabb, the Mack Truck Murders. On the evening of August 18, 1983, Crabb spent an hour at the Inland Hotel before being refused service for intoxication before being involved in a fight and being ejected from the premises. He then walked approximately 500 meters to his truck, and drove it to a nearby motel where he unhitched one of 2 attached trailers. He then drove the 25-ton semi and trailer at speed around a blind bend, through a car park, around a minibus, turned and drove it through the Bessa brick wall into the crowded bar, crushing the people there, killing 5 people and seriously injuring 16 others. Leaving the engine running, he then got out of the truck, smiled down at one of his victims, stepped over some bodies and ran. It had been 40 minutes between being thrown out and driving the truck into the bar. Crabb is an inmate at Acacia Prison, near Perth. Constance Fisher of Fairfield, Maine, was twice committed to the Augusta Mental Health Institute in Augusta, Maine, each time after drowning 3 of her own children. The first was in 1954 in Waterville, when she drowned 3 of her children in the bathtub. After numerous appeals from her husband Carl Fisher, and having been declared cured and sent home, she repeated the performance with 3 more kids in 1967, in rural Fairfield Center, Maine, and was recommitted. She was a troubled soul and deeply religious. She had been adopted and was afraid that her children would be doomed and not go to heaven once they grew up to be adults. On the night of October 1st, 1973, she slipped off the hospital grounds and threw herself into the Kennebec River. Her body was found nearly a week later in South Gardner. David Burke, American mass murderer, on December 7, 1987, David Burke, a fired airline employee, followed his ex-boss aboard a Pacific Southwest airline jet with his mind set on revenge. He shot the man in mid-flight and caused the plane to crash, killing all 43 people on board including himself. U.S. Air terminated David for petty theft of $69. He had also been suspected of involvement with the narcotics ring. After boarding the plane, Burke wrote a message on an air sickness bag. The note read, "Hi Ray, I think it's sort of ironical that we end up like this. I asked for some leniency for my family. Remember? Well, I got none. And you'll get none." Burke's fingertip was lodged in the trigger when the investigators found the revolver. This indicated that he was alive and was holding the gun until the moment of impact. Karl Friedrich Wilhelm Grossmann was a German serial killer, sexual predator, and alleged cannibal. Grossmann sold meat on the black market and even had a hot dog stand at a train station. Some believe the meat contained human flesh. He threw some of their bones and other inedible parts into the river. Pieces of missing women were found in the canal near Andreas Square and off the Lusenstadt Canal, sometimes on a daily basis. Some investigators suspected that Grossmann murdered up to 100 women and girls. Only the body of his final victim was found. Some have suggested as many as 50 women entered Grossmann's apartment and ended up being murdered and dismembered. On August 21, 1921, neighbors heard screams and banging noises, followed by silence. The police found the body of a young woman who had recently been murdered. Grossmann was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder. He hanged himself in his prison cell before the end of the main trial. In 1999, 23-year-old Fan Manu was working as a nightclub hostess when she made a mistake which cost her life. She resorted to stealing from her clients to support herself. Unfortunately, Fan stole from Triad member Chan Man Lok. This led to Fan being kidnapped and imprisoned. She was beaten with metal bars, used as a punching bag, kicked in the head around 50 times. Spices were rubbed into her wounds. This treatment eventually led to traumatic shock and ultimately death. She was then dismembered. They boiled her flesh to hide the smell of decomposition and discarded the remains. Her skull was sewn into the head of a large Hello Kitty stuffed toy. A lover of one of the men later reported the murder to the police. The men were sentenced to life imprisonment, one having his sentence reduced at retrial to 18 years. On November 26, 2016, Guy Jr. attacked and killed his father with a knife while his mother was out shopping. Upon arriving home, Lisa Guy entered through the front door and proceeded upstairs. She was attacked and killed with a knife. 9 of her ribs were severed. Guy Sr.'s hands were removed at the wrists. Lisa's head was removed, carried downstairs, placed in a pot on the stove and heated. The head was not just severed but broken off with force. Both victims also had their arms and legs disarticulated. Guy Sr. at the waist and Lisa at the knees, and their limbs and torsos were placed in a bin full of chemicals to dissolve. Each body had a large gash inflicted after death. Guy Jr. stabbed his father at least 42 times, his mother at least 31 times. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. He was also convicted of abuse of a corpse. Linda and Charlotte Mulhall, aka the Scissor Sisters, from Dublin, Ireland, who killed and dismembered their mother's boyfriend Ferris Whaley Noor in March 2005. Noor was killed with a Stanley knife wielded by Charlotte and struck with a hammer by Linda following Noor touching Linda in a sexual way. Their mother Kathleen then started screaming at him and an argument took place where Kathleen Mulhall was alleged to have told them, "Just kill him for me." Noor was stabbed at least 27 times. His head and penis were sliced off and the rest of his corpse dismembered and dumped in the Royal Canal in Dublin, where a piece of leg still wearing a sock was spotted floating near Croke Park 10 days later. They carried the head by bus to Tulloch and buried it in a field, with Linda returning later to dig it up, carry it to another field and smash it further with a hammer and bury it again. Melissa Drexler, aka the prom mom, delivered a baby in a restroom stall at her high school prom and threw the body in the trash before returning to the dance. On June 6, 1997, the day of her senior prom, the 18-year-old suffered cramps on her way to the banquet hall, and on arriving, she retired to the restroom where the baby was born. Drexler then retrieved the baby from the toilet bowl, cut the umbilical cord on the serrated edge of a napkin dispenser, wrapped the baby in several garbage sacks and dumped her son in a trash can. She then ate a salad and danced afterwards. The baby was discovered by a janitor responding to reports of blood in the restroom. Judge John Rick Kearty sentenced her to 15 years in prison, and on November 26, 2001 she was released on parole after serving only little over 3 years. On June 29, 2019, Tulare County deputies responded to a call about a woman who was acting strangely and had led 2 boys into a cornfield. Within the corn, they made the discovery: Jackson, 12, and Jacob Jr., 7, had been drowned by their mother. The boys were rushed to the nearest hospital. Jackson died there, and Jacob was moved to Valley Children's Hospital. He'd suffered brain damage. Sadly, he died 8 days later. Tolnis had been convicted a decade ago in Montana for trying to drown a 12-year-old when he was an infant, and she spent less than a year at the state psychiatric hospital. Sherry told authorities that she drowned her sons because they were possessed by demons. The special allegation that Tolnis was lying in wait before allegedly killing her sons means she could be eligible for the death penalty. George Jefferson Hassell killed his wife and 8 children aged between 1 and 21 years old. He also killed his wife and 3 stepchildren in 1917 in California. On the night of December 5, 1926, Hassell and his wife argued over him raping and impregnating his stepdaughter. Hassell proceeded to strike his wife in the face repeatedly with a ball-peen hammer. After the murder of his wife, he moved from room to room, using a straight razor and stockings to kill them, in order from youngest to oldest. He woke the 2 eldest boys and a scuffle ensued. Hassell killed them with a shotgun and an axe. All of the bodies were then stored in the newly dug root cellar by the house. The eldest Hassell son Alton returned home after 4 days and George shot him in the head as he was sleeping. A psychiatrist declared Hassell sane, and he was found guilty and put to death. Adam Joseph Guy, 36, killed his 64-year-old mother at her home in Safety Beach in September 2014. He was her only child. He later told police he thought she was the last demon on earth. Mrs. Guy was found by police with serious injuries at her Pickings Road home and later died at the property. On the day she died, there was an argument about her son's reluctance to take prescribed medication. He then choked her into unconsciousness, beat her up and tried to strangle her before picking up an electric guitar and smashing her skull in. He said he did not intend to kill his mother. He was experiencing command auditory hallucinations telling him that he had to commit to killing her. The more he choked her, the more his mother looked and sounded like a demon. He was ordered to remain under supervision at the Thomas Embling Secure Mental Health Hospital for a nominal term of 25 years. The first of the Mary Bell murders occurred on May 25, 1968, the day before her 11th birthday. 4-year-old Martin Brown's body was found in a vacant house in Scotswood. Although she strangled the boy, her grip was not strong enough to leave ligature marks, leading to uncertainty about the cause of death. On July 31, 1968, she killed again. Mary strangled 3-year-old Brian Howe. Before leaving the crime scene, she carved the letter M into the boy's stomach with scissors. She also scratched his legs and mutilated his penis. Mary, at the time the youngest serial killer in British history, was convicted of manslaughter instead of murder. She was released from prison in 1980, at age 23, after serving 12 years of her sentence. Friday, August 26, 1988, 4:30 p.m., Anthony Paul Arkwright attacked his 68-year-old grandfather, stabbing him in the neck, severing an artery and rendering him unconscious, and then murdered him with an axe and a lump hammer. Saturday, August 27, 1988, 3 a.m., he entered the flat of his neighbor, 45-year-old Raymond Ford. He stabbed Mr. Ford over 250 times, plunging the knife into every part of his body. He gutted and disemboweled the corpse with a surgical precision. Sunday, August 28, 1988, Marcus Law was savagely butchered, being stabbed over 70 times, before being left with cigarettes stuck in his mouth and ears. He also had his eyes gouged out and cigarettes placed in the sockets. Arkwright was sentenced to a whole life term. The Easter Sunday massacre occurred on March 30, 1975, when 41-year-old James Rupert fatally shot 11 members of his own family in Hamilton, Ohio. At 4 p.m. James woke up, loaded a .357 Magnum, 2.22 caliber handguns and a rifle. He killed Leonard Jr. when he shot him in the head, then his sister-in-law Alma when he shot her. He shot his mother once in the head and twice in the chest. David, 11, Teresa, 9, and Carol, 13, were later killed by him. James shot his remaining niece and nephews, and 12, Leonard, 17, Michael, 16, Thomas, 15, and John, 4. Charity had been shot once in the chest. The remaining victims were shot in the head and shot again to ensure they had died. The massacre was over in less than 2 minutes. Billy Richard Glaze, aka Butcher Knife Billy, is a Minnesotan serial killer convicted of stabbing to death 3 women. He was a Native American who believed that all Native women should be raped and killed. Glaze was suspected of the murders of at least 50 women in multiple states. He has boasted to police about having killed over 20 women. He was arrested August 31, 1987 while drunk driving, for a violation of his parole from a rape in 1974. The arresting officers found a bloody shirt and a crowbar and nightstick in his truck. Hair samples from the crowbar were used to convict him of murder. Glaze died from lung cancer after spending more than 25 years in prison. His guilt has come into question by the discovery of DNA evidence excluding Glaze and implicating another man. William Mansfield Jr. is an American serial killer, child molester, and sex offender, responsible for the murders of 5 women and girls between 1975 and 1980. The coroner ruled the cause of deaths as strangulation. He buried the bodies of 4 victims at the family home in Spring Hill, Florida. The authorities located a skull and bones in a shallow grave. Eventually 3 more skeletons were unearthed, all belonging to young women. Mansfield also traveled with his brother to California, where he raped and strangled a Watsonville woman. Court documents said the women were all sexually assaulted by both Mansfield Jr., his younger brother Gary, and their father William Mansfield Sr. Mansfield Jr. eventually pleaded guilty to killing all 4 of the women found at his home, and also pleaded guilty to the attempted sexual battery of a 5th woman. He is serving a life sentence in California. Anthony Morley carved up his lover's flesh, seasoned it with herbs, fried it in olive oil, and then ate it. He won the first Mr. Gay UK contest in 1993. In 2008 he was imprisoned for the killing, dismemberment and partial cannibalization of his lover, magazine executive Damien Oldfield. He savagely murdered his boyfriend Damien Oldfield, then cooked his flesh, mortally slashed his lover's throat and brutally stabbed him multiple times after the pair had watched Brokeback Mountain in bed in Leeds. The trained chef then carved up his flesh, seasoned it with herbs, fried it in olive oil and then ate it. He then stumbled to a nearby kebab shop in a blood-drenched dressing gown and told the staff he had killed someone because they tried to rape him. He was found guilty on October 17, 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment for the crime. A suburban Kansas City social worker, Terry Lee Zenner, 26, was almost decapitated in a chainsaw attack during a home visit. She was killed when she went to Andrew Illmaker's Overland Park home, after telling her husband she was making a short visit to make sure a client was taking his medication. Illmaker, 20, had been diagnosed with schizotypal personality disorder. He was charged with first-degree murder in Zenner's death, and with aggravated battery for stabbing his mother, Sue Illmaker, while she was trying to protect Zenner from her son. The social worker would have been decapitated if her hair had not become entangled in the chainsaw's blade. Illmaker said he wasn't planning on killing his social worker, and that she was already dead from multiple stab wounds to her throat by the time he used the chainsaw. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Irina Gaidamakik, aka Satan in a Skirt, is a Russian serial killer, who, between 2002 and 2010, would knock on the doors of her victims and claim to be a social worker. Once inside, she would kill them using a hammer or an axe before stealing their money. In some cases, she would start a fire on her way out to cover her tracks. Gaidamakik killed 17 elderly women before a would-be victim managed to escape and give a description to the police. After she was caught, the killer said she had only carried out the crimes for the money for alcohol after her husband tried to make her quit her drinking habit by cutting her off financially. A lenient judge sparked outrage by only sentencing Irina Gaidamakik to 20 years in prison, giving her a lighter punishment because she is a mother with dependent children. Pedro Rodrigues Filho, aka the Brazilian Dexter, Pedrinho Matador, Killer Lil Pedro, Killer PD, or simply Killer PD, was a Brazilian serial killer. Filho's father killed his mother and the young killer took revenge by visiting his dad in prison and stabbing him 22 times. He had also tortured and killed a host of drug dealers and traffickers in Brazil. Filho was arrested and sentenced to 126 years in jail in 1973, but did not stop killing. He murdered a further 47 people while in prison, all inmates. This bumped his sentence up to 400 years. However, the law in Brazil caps prison sentences at 30 years. Filho served 30 years, plus an extra 4 years for the murders committed behind bars. October 29, 1995, convicted sex offender Paul Stephen Osborne raped 10-year-old Leanne Oliver and 9-year-old Patricia Leedy before bashing them to death with a tree branch and a wool jacket Warrana Beach, Queensland, Australia. After drinking 12 beers and smoking marijuana at a barbecue, Osborne took the girls to the beach for a swim. Leanne Oliver's father, Albie Oliver, found Osborne's wallet and the girls' bodies in sand dunes the next morning. Osborne was arrested. When asked by police why he killed the girls, Osborne told police, "I don't know whether I blacked out or went crazy. They seemed pretty nice." Osborne pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 consecutive sentences of life imprisonment plus 36 years without the possibility of parole. In sentencing Osborne, Queensland Supreme Court Justice Glenn Williams said that he was beyond redemption. As 10-year-olds, John Venables and Robert Thompson were the youngest murderers ever convicted in the modern history of the United Kingdom. As his mother shopped at the mall, the boys abducted James Bulger, a 2-year-old toddler. They took him and tortured him for what would be the remainder of his very short life. Thompson and Venables dropped the boy on his head, causing facial injuries. They threw bricks at him, paint in his eyes, stuffed batteries in his mouth, kicked him, and dropped an iron bar on his head. Bulger suffered at least 10 skull fractures and died from the impact of his 42 injuries. The boys then put the body on the train tracks, hoping that his death would look accidental if it was run over by a train. 38 people saw the boys with Bulger before they killed him. Thompson and Venables were found guilty of the murder of Bulger on November 24, 1993. Gleeful serial killer Nancy Hazel was known alternately as the Giggling Granny. Arrested for the murder of one husband in 1955, she confessed to murdering 4 and maintained that she never harmed her blood kin. Various law enforcement officials in Alabama and elsewhere, however, speculate that she is likely to have murdered as many as 12 people, including a mother-in-law, a grandson, a granddaughter, her mother, her sister, and 2 of her own children with rat poison or arsenic. Her habit of smiling and giggling as she discussed her crimes earned her the Giggling Granny nickname. A judge declared her insane, sparing her the electric chair and gave her a life sentence. Doss died of leukemia on June 2, 1965, on the 10th anniversary of her incarceration, and was buried in Oak Hill Memorial Park in McAlester, Oklahoma. Lisa Montgomery constantly lied about being pregnant and having miscarriages. In 2004, she befriended pregnant woman Bobby Jo Stinnett, showed up at her house and strangled her with a rope, then butchered her stomach and took out her baby. She was discovered by her mother Becky Harper lying in a pool of blood approximately an hour after the murder. Harper immediately called authorities and described the wounds inflicted upon her daughter as appearing as if her stomach had exploded. Police had gone to Montgomery's home after tracing online communications to her IP address. They found Montgomery inside, holding the infant, and watching television. Montgomery was arrested an hour later after her story fell apart and she confessed. Montgomery was executed by lethal injection on January 13, 2021, at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. When asked if she had any last words, she replied, "No." On July 30, 2008, Tim McLean, a 22-year-old Canadian man, was stabbed, beheaded, and cannibalized while riding a Greyhound Canada bus along the Trans-Canada Highway. McLean was sleeping with his headphones on when the man sitting next to him, Vincent Waigwanley, suddenly produced a large knife and began stabbing him in the neck and chest. The bus driver pulled to the side of the road. He and all the other passengers fled the vehicle. The driver and 2 other men made an attempt to rescue McLean, but were chased away by Lee, who slashed at them from behind the locked bus doors. Lee ultimately decapitated McLean and displayed his severed head to those standing outside the bus, then returned to McLean's body and began severing other parts and consuming some of McLean's flesh. Lee was remanded to the Selkirk Mental Health Center and was released in 2017. The partial remains of 36-year-old Ivy Chen were found in Coquitlam, BC's Minnetonka Park in March 2020. Officers had been called to reports of a suspicious fire around 6 a.m. on March 10. Her sister, Tracy Chen, was charged with first-degree murder and committing an indignity to a dead body. Tracy was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia and heard voices in her head. Tracy Chen killed her sister Ivy and then cut up her body and tried to burn it. Evidence indicates Tracy stabbed her sister to death in the apartment they shared and then tried to dissolve her remains in acid. When that didn't work, she put them in cooking pots and took them to the park and set them on fire. Tracy believed her sister Ivy was not really her sister and that she was going to kill her, so she believed the only way to save her life was to kill her sister at the direction of the voices she was hearing at the time. Tracy will remain in a psychiatric facility and her condition will be reviewed on a regular basis.